Oh, the courtroom. My mother rolled her eyes in disgust while my father looked away. Then the judge froze, leaned forward, and whispered, "Wait, is that really her?" The room fell silent. They had no idea who I was until. The moment I stepped into that courtroom, my mother's eyes rolled so hard I swear they almost got stuck, while my dad just stared at the floor, pretending I didn't exist. But then, the judge, Judge Holbrook herself, stopped dead, leaned forward, and whispered, "Wait, Anna, is that really her?" The entire room froze. They had no idea who I truly was, until that very second. "Don't embarrass us," my mother had hissed just moments before, as we walked through the grand courthouse doors. Her voice was a low, venomous whisper. "Just stay quiet, and let the real lawyers handle this." I didn't respond. I just kept walking, my heels clicking a sharp rhythm against the polished marble floor. Each click a beat of the confidence I'd spent years painstakingly building. My father wouldn't even look at me, his gaze fixed somewhere in the distant, empty space, as if I were a stain on the pristine floor he couldn't bear to acknowledge. Nothing new there. My name is Anna. I'm 31 years old, and for most of my life, I've been the family disappointment, the dropout, the failure, the one they simply erased from conversation when relatives asked about their children. We were at the courthouse in Omaha, Nebraska, because my parents were trying to evict their tenant, a woman named Claire, who had the unmitigated audacity to ask for repairs before paying rent on a building that was, frankly, falling apart. My parents owned 3 rental properties, all inherited from my grandfather, and they ran them like feudal lords collecting taxes, with absolute disregard for the human beings living inside. Claire had been in one of their apartments for 2 years, always paying on time, until the ceiling started leaking and black mold appeared in her daughter's bedroom. She'd withheld rent and respectfully asked for the repairs to be done first. My parents, naturally, responded by filing for eviction. She signed a contract. My mother had ranted over the phone 2 weeks ago, her voice vibrating with self-righteous indignation. She doesn't get to just stop paying because she's picky about a little moisture. A little moisture. That's what she called black mold. I'd heard about the case through my younger sister, Melissa, who, despite being 28, still lived at home and was utterly under their thumb. She'd mentioned it casually during one of our rare, strained phone calls, completely unaware that I'd spent the last 7 years clawing my way through law school, working 3 jobs, sleeping in my car more times than I could count, and finally, passing the bar exam. I'd done it all alone, without a single dollar or word of encouragement from them. They didn't even know I'd gone to college, let alone become an attorney. The day I'd walked out of their house at 19, my father had physically thrown my meager belongings onto the front lawn. "You're nothing," he'd screamed, his face contorted in fury. "You'll never amount to anything without us." My mother had stood in the doorway, arms crossed, a chilling smirk on her face. "Don't come crawling back when you fail." I hadn't. Not even when I was sleeping in my beat-up car behind a grocery store, surviving on vending machine snacks. I didn't go back. Not even when I was so exhausted from working overnight shifts that I could barely stay awake in class. I didn't ask them for help. I'd rather starve than swallow my pride and beg from people who'd made it devastatingly clear I was worthless. Now, as we walked toward the courtroom, I watched my mother smooth down her expensive blouse and adjust the perfectly matched pearls around her neck. She'd always cared more about appearances than anything else, a perfect facade. My father walked beside her in his tailored suit, the very picture of respectability, the kind they sold at their country club. They'd told everyone there that they only had one daughter, Melissa, who worked as a receptionist at their dentist's office and still let them control every single aspect of her life. "I don't know why you even came," my mother muttered, her voice dripping with disdain, as we approached the courtroom doors. "This doesn't concern you." I just smiled, but said nothing. Let them think I was just here to watch. Let them think I was still the broken girl they'd thrown away. Inside the courtroom, the air was thick with tension, heavy and suffocating. Claire sat at the defendant's table, her hands clasped so tightly in her lap her knuckles were white. She was a small woman in her 40s, wearing a dress that had seen better days, far better. Her eyes were red-rimmed, and I could see the sheer exhaustion etched into every single line of her face. This wasn't just about an apartment to her. It was about keeping a roof over her daughter's head. It was everything. My parents took their seats on the plaintiff's side, and my mother, with a condescending flick of her wrist, gestured for me to sit in the gallery behind them. I walked past her without even acknowledging the command. Instead, I headed straight toward Claire's table. I could feel my mother's eyes burning into my back, could practically hear her mind racing, scrambling to figure out what I was doing. "Excuse me," I said quietly to Claire, my voice calm but firm. "I'm your attorney." Her eyes widened, a flicker of bewildered hope. I couldn't afford an attorney," she stammered. "I was going to represent myself." "Consider this pro bono," I said, setting my briefcase down with a satisfying thud. "I've reviewed your case, and you have every right to withhold rent until those repairs are made. Your landlords violated the implied warranty of habitability." Behind me, I heard my mother's sharp intake of breath. Then my father's voice, low and furious. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" I turned to face them, and for the first time in 12 long years, I looked my parents directly in the eye. "I'm doing my job." My mother's face had gone pale, then blotchy red with rage. "You can't be serious. You're not a lawyer." "Actually, I am." I pulled out my bar card, holding it up, the plastic cool against my fingertips. "I passed the bar exam 2 years ago. I've been working at a firm downtown, mostly handling tenant rights cases. This is exactly my area of expertise." My father stood up, his hands clenched into fists, his face a mask of disbelief. "This is ridiculous. You dropped out of community college. You're a homeless bum we threw out for being a waste of space." "I was homeless for a while. Yes," I said calmly, deliberately. "Thanks to you. But I worked my way through school. I graduated from college, then law school. I did it all without a single cent from you." The judge entered before my father could respond, and everyone scrambled to their seats. Judge Patricia Holbrook was in her 60s, with steel gray hair and a no-nonsense demeanor that made even experienced attorneys nervous. She looked over the courtroom, her eyes settling on me with a flicker of recognition, a tiny spark of surprise. "Counsel, please approach," she said. I walked up to the bench, and my parents' attorney, a man named Gerald who charged $500 an hour, joined me. Judge Holbrook looked between us, then down at the papers in front of her. "I see we have representation for the defendant now," she observed. "Counselor Anna Thompson, Your Honor," I said, my voice steady. "I'm representing Claire Mitchell in this matter." Judge Holbrook's eyebrows rose slightly. "Anna Thompson, I thought that name looked familiar. Didn't you argue the Riverside Apartments case last year?" "Yes, Your Honor. You won that case, if I recall. The tenants got everything they asked for. Repairs, rent reimbursement, and damages." "That's correct, Your Honor." She looked at my parents, then back at me, and something indefinable shifted in her expression. A hint of a smirk? A glint of admiration? "This should be interesting. Let's proceed." As I walked back to my table, I caught my mother's expression. Pure horror mixed with utter disbelief. My father looked like he'd been slapped, his face slack with shock. Melissa, sitting behind them, had her hand clamped over her mouth, her eyes wide with something I couldn't quite decipher. I sat down next to Claire, who was staring at me like I'd just walked on water. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "I don't know how to thank you. Just tell the truth when you're asked questions," I said, a small, genuine smile finally breaking through. "That's all you need to do." Gerald stood up first, presenting my parents' case. He painted Claire as a difficult tenant, looking for excuses not to pay rent, making mountains out of molehills regarding minor maintenance issues. He showed photos of the apartment that had been taken years ago when it was first rented, pristine, spotless, clean. "The plaintiffs have always maintained their properties to the highest standards," Gerald said smoothly, his voice oozing practiced confidence. "They're responsible landlords who simply want what they're owed, the rent that was agreed upon in a legally binding contract." When it was my turn, I stood up and walked to the evidence table. I'd spent the last 2 weeks gathering everything I needed, everything they'd tried to hide. Photos of the leaking ceiling, the black mold creeping up the walls, the broken windows that wouldn't close properly. Medical records showing that Claire's daughter had developed alarming respiratory problems. Maintenance requests that had been ignored for months. A city inspector's report that condemned parts of the building as uninhabitable. "Your Honor," I said, laying out the evidence piece by painstaking piece. "The defendant didn't withhold rent out of spite or convenience. She withheld it because the apartment she was paying for had become a health hazard. Nebraska law is clear. Landlords must maintain properties in a condition fit for human habitation. When they fail to do so, tenants have the legal right to withhold rent until repairs are made. I walked the judge through every violation, every ignored request, every broken promise. My parents had collected rent for months while knowing the building was falling apart. They'd threatened Claire when she complained, told her she could leave if she didn't like it, fully aware that she couldn't afford to break her lease and move somewhere else. This isn't about a difficult tenant, I stated, my voice ringing with conviction. This is about landlords who saw their tenants as nothing more than a revenue stream, who cared more about collecting money than ensuring the people living in their buildings were safe. Judge Holbrook listened intently, making notes, asking pointed questions. When I showed her the medical records for Claire's daughter, I saw her jaw tighten. "Counselor," she said to Gerald, her voice sharper now, "did your clients know about the mold?" Gerald shuffled his papers uncomfortably. "They were aware of some moisture issues, Your Honor. But did they know about the mold?" she repeated, cutting him off, her gaze unwavering. "Yes, Your Honor," he conceded. "But they dispute that it was as severe as the tenant claims. The city inspector's report says otherwise." Judge Holbrook looked at my parents, and her expression was one of barely concealed disgust. "In fact, it says the entire unit should have been vacated months ago." My mother opened her mouth to speak, but my father grabbed her arm, stopping her. Judge Holbrook turned back to me. "Continue, Counselor." I presented the rest of my evidence, building the case brick by damning brick. By the time I finished, there was no doubt in anyone's mind that my parents had been negligent landlords at best and criminally negligent at worst. They'd put a child's health at risk for the sake of collecting $1,200 a month. "Your Honor," I said in closing, my voice resonating with quiet power, "my client isn't asking for much. She's asking for what she's legally entitled to, a safe place to live. She's asking for repairs to be made, for the conditions that forced her to withhold rent to be remedied. And she's asking for reimbursement for the medical expenses her daughter incurred as a direct result of living in an unsafe environment." I sat down, and Claire reached over to squeeze my hand. Her eyes were filled with tears, but they were tears of relief, not despair. Judge Holbrook looked at my parents for a long moment. "I'll be honest with you," she said, her voice grave. "I've seen a lot of landlord-tenant disputes in my years on the bench, but this is one of the more egregious cases I've encountered." My mother's face had gone from red to an ashen white. My father looked like he wanted to sink into the floor and disappear. "I'm ruling in favor of the defendant," Judge Holbrook continued. "Not only will the eviction be dismissed, but the plaintiffs will be required to make all necessary repairs within 30 days. Additionally, they will reimburse the defendant for 3 months of rent and all medical expenses related to her daughter's respiratory issues. And just so we're clear, if these repairs aren't completed to code within the specified time frame, I will personally refer this case to the city for further action." She banged her gavel, a sharp, resounding clap, and it was over. Claire broke down sobbing, thanking me over and over, clutching my arm like I was her lifeline as I helped her gather her things and walked her out of the courtroom. Behind us, I could hear my parents arguing with Gerald in hushed, furious voices. Outside the courtroom, Claire hugged me tightly. "You saved us," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I don't know how I'll ever repay you." "You don't have to," I said, patting her back gently. "Just take care of your daughter." She left, still crying, and I stood there for a moment, letting the weight of what had just happened settle over me. 12 years. 12 years of being told I was worthless, of being treated like I didn't exist, of fighting every single day to prove that I was more than what they said I was. And now, in one afternoon, I'd proven them wrong in the most public, undeniable way possible. I was gathering my things when I heard footsteps behind me. I turned to find my mother standing there, her face contorted with a raw, ugly rage. "How dare you?" she spat, her voice barely a whisper, yet radiating pure venom. "How dare you humiliate us like that?" "I did my job," I said calmly, my own voice surprisingly steady. "Your job? You called destroying your own family your job." "You're not my family," I said. The words came out flat, emotionless, a statement of fact I'd long accepted. "You stopped being my family the day you threw me out with nothing." My father appeared beside her, his face purple with anger. You ungrateful little. I'm not the one who should be ashamed here. I cut him off, my voice rising slightly, gaining strength. You put a child's health at risk because you were too cheap to fix a leaking roof. You're lucky Judge Holbrook didn't refer you for criminal charges. We raised you, my mother cried, her voice breaking, a performative display of hurt. We gave you everything. I laughed, a bitter sound that echoed in the empty hallway. You gave me nothing. Everything I have, I earned on my own. And you know what? I'm glad you threw me out, because it taught me exactly who you are. People who care more about money and appearances than about doing what's right. I walked past them, my head held high, leaving them standing there in their expensive clothes, their pride utterly shattered. But even as I walked away, I knew this wasn't over. My mother never let anything go, and neither did my father. I drove back to my office in a daze, replaying the entire scene in my head. The look on Judge Holbrook's face when she recognized me. The horror in my parents' eyes when they realized I wasn't the failure they'd convinced themselves I was. The gratitude in Claire's voice when she thanked me. It all felt surreal, like I was watching someone else's life unfold. The firm I worked for, Kestrel and Associates, was located in a renovated warehouse downtown. It wasn't fancy, exposed brick walls, secondhand furniture, mismatched coffee mugs in the break room, but it was home. The senior partner, Diane Kestrel, had given me my first real break after I passed the bar exam. She'd seen something in me during the interview, something that made her willing to take a chance on a woman with no connections and a resume that included lived in a car as a gap-year experience. I'd been working there for 2 years, taking on cases that bigger firms wouldn't touch. Tenant rights, workers' compensation, disability claims, the kind of law that didn't make anyone rich, but helped people who desperately needed it. Diane always said we were in the business of leveling playing fields, and I believed her. This job had given me purpose, had shown me that everything I'd suffered through had been worth it if I could use it to help others. When I walked into the office, Diane was waiting in the conference room. She waved me over, and I could tell from her expression that she'd heard about the courtroom victory. Word traveled fast in legal circles. You did good work today, she said as I sat down. Claire called me right after court. She was crying so hard I could barely understand her, but she wanted me to know what you did for her. I just presented the facts, I said, deflecting. No. Diane shook her head, a knowing look in her eyes. You gave her hope. You showed her that the system could work, that people like her don't have to just accept being trampled on. That's not nothing, Anna. I felt my throat tighten. Thank you. My mind, however, was still racing. But we need to talk about something else. Diane's expression grew serious. Your parents. They're not going to let this go, are they? No. I admitted, a knot forming in my stomach. They're not. Do you think they'll retaliate? I know they will. I thought about the look in my mother's eyes, the pure rage and humiliation. They'll try to discredit me, try to ruin my reputation. They have money and connections. They'll use both. Diane was quiet for a moment. We'll deal with it when it comes. But Anna, you need to be prepared. People like your parents, when they feel cornered, they can be dangerous. Not physically, necessarily, but they'll go after everything you've built. I know, I said, a cold determination settling over me. But I couldn't just stand by and watch them hurt people. Not anymore. I understand. And for what it's worth, I'm proud of you. What you did today took courage. After Diane left, I sat in the conference room alone, staring out the window at the Omaha skyline. The sun was setting, painting everything in shades of orange and gold. It was beautiful, but I couldn't shake the feeling that a storm was coming. My phone buzzed with a text from Melissa. Mom and Dad are furious. They're talking about suing you. Please be careful. I didn't respond. What was there to say? Of course they were furious. Of course they wanted revenge. That's who they were. People who couldn't stand to be challenged, who would rather destroy someone than admit they were wrong. But I'd faced worse than their anger. I'd survived homelessness, poverty, and years of their emotional abuse. Whatever they threw at me now, I could handle it. At least, that's what I told myself. By the way, if you're still with me on this wild ride, make sure to hit that subscribe button. More unbelievable stories are coming, and you won't want to miss what happens next. As I packed up my things to leave, my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something, an instinct, made me pick up. Anna Thompson? A man's voice asked. Yes. Who is this? My name is Henry Bradford. I was your grandfather's attorney. I need to speak with you about something urgent. Something your parents don't know about. My heart started racing. Urgent? Grandfather's attorney? What is it? Not over the phone. Can you meet me tomorrow morning? 9 a.m. at my office. Yes, I heard myself say, my voice a little breathless. I'll be there. He gave me the address and hung up. I stood there holding my phone, my mind spinning. What could my grandfather's attorney want after all these years? My grandfather had died 12 years ago. His estate settled and distributed. What could possibly be urgent now? I had a feeling I was about to find out, and something told me it was going to change everything. Henry Bradford's office was in an old building downtown, the kind with marble floors and brass fixtures that had been there since the 1920s. I arrived at 9 a.m. sharp, my stomach churning with anticipation, a mix of nerves and burgeoning hope. The receptionist led me to a corner office where Henry sat behind a massive oak desk, surrounded by towering file cabinets and leather-bound law books. He was in his 70s, with wisps of white hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He stood when I entered, extending his hand. Anna, thank you for coming on such short notice. You said it was urgent, I replied, shaking his hand, my voice tight with unspoken questions. What's this about? He gestured for me to sit and pulled out a thick, aged folder from his desk drawer. I've been your grandfather's attorney for 40 years. When he died, I handled his estate according to his wishes. But there was one provision in his will that was kept sealed, a provision that could only be opened under specific conditions. My pulse quickened. What kind of provision? Your grandfather loved you very much, Anna. He saw how your parents treated you, and it broke his heart. So he made arrangements to protect you. Henry opened the folder and slid a document across the desk. He established a trust fund in your name. $50,000 to be released when you turned 30 or when you obtained a professional degree, whichever came first. I stared at the document, unable to speak, my mind reeling. $50,000? It was more money than I'd ever had, more than I'd ever imagined having. You passed the bar exam 2 years ago, Henry continued, a gentle smile on his face. That met the conditions. The money has been sitting in trust, accumulating interest. It's now worth nearly $60,000. Why didn't you tell me sooner? My voice came out as a whisper, laced with a strange mix of gratitude and longing. Your grandfather's instructions were explicit. The trust was to remain completely confidential until you met the conditions. He didn't want your parents to know about it. Didn't want them to interfere or try to claim it for themselves. He knew them too well. I thought about my grandfather, the quiet man who'd always had a kind word for me when my parents didn't. He'd been the only one who believed I could be something more than what my parents said I was. There's something else, Henry said, pulling out an envelope, an almost sacred gesture. Your grandfather wrote you a letter. He asked me to give it to you when the time came. My hands trembled as I opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper covered in my grandfather's careful, familiar handwriting. Dear Anna, if you're reading this, then you've done what I always knew you could do. You've made something of yourself, despite everything they've thrown at you. I'm proud of you. Even though I won't be there to tell you in person, I know your parents have made your life difficult. I've watched them favor your sister. Watched them tear you down whenever you tried to rise. It broke my heart, but I couldn't change them. All I could do was try to give you a foundation to build on. This money isn't a solution to all your problems, but it's a start. Use it wisely. Build the life you deserve. And remember, you are worth more than they will ever understand. There's one more thing I need you to know. I was planning to change my will completely, to leave you half of everything. Half the properties, half my savings. You deserved it more than they did. But I ran out of time. Be careful, Anna. Your parents are not good people. They care more about money than anything else, even family. Don't let them destroy you. You're stronger than they are. Love always, Grandpa. Tears streamed down my face as I read the letter, each word a balm and a wound. My grandfather had wanted to give me more. He'd been planning to change his will to make sure I was truly taken care of, but he died before he could do it. There's something you should know, Henry said gently, pulling me back from my thoughts. The week before your grandfather died, your mother came to see me. She was asking questions about his will, about whether he'd made any recent changes. I didn't tell her anything, of course, due to client privilege, but she was very persistent, very concerned about the estate. A chill ran down my spine, cold and sharp. You think she knew he was planning to change the will? I can't say for certain, Henry continued, choosing his words carefully. But the timing was suspicious. Your grandfather was in perfect health 1 week, and the next week he was dead. Heart failure, they said. But he just had a physical exam, and his doctor told him he had the heart of a man 20 years younger. What are you saying? I asked, my voice barely a whisper, dread coiling in my gut. Henry leaned back in his chair, his gaze steady. I'm saying that when someone stands to lose a significant inheritance, they might do things they wouldn't otherwise do. I'm saying that your grandfather's death was very convenient for your parents. And I'm saying that if you look closely at the circumstances, you might find some questions that were never properly answered. My mind was reeling. Was he suggesting what I thought he was suggesting? That my parents had something to do with my grandfather's death? I have no proof, Henry continued. Just an old lawyer's suspicions. But I thought you should know, especially now that you've gone up against them in court. They've shown you what they're capable of when their money is threatened. Imagine what they might do if the stakes were even higher. I left Henry's office in a daze, clutching the folder with the trust documents and my grandfather's letter. $60,000. It was enough to pay off the student loans I was still chipping away at. Enough to have a real emergency fund. Enough to finally breathe. But all I could think about was Henry's words. Your grandfather's death was very convenient for your parents. I drove straight to the public library and spent the next 3 hours digging through old newspaper archives. I found my grandfather's obituary, brief and respectful. Died peacefully at home, surrounded by family. But there was another article, smaller, from a week later. A letter to the editor from my grandfather's longtime physician, Dr. Russell Hayes, expressing shock at the sudden death of a patient he'd just examined and declared healthy. I found Dr. Hayes' contact information and called his office. He'd retired 5 years ago, but the receptionist gave me his home number. When I called, he answered on the third ring. Dr. Hayes, my name is Anna Thompson. I'm calling about my grandfather, James Thompson. You were his doctor. There was a pause. James Thompson. Yes, I remember him. A good man. His death was such a shock. Can I ask you something? You wrote a letter to the newspaper saying you were surprised by his death. What? Another pause, longer this time. Are you asking as his granddaughter or in some other capacity? I'm an attorney, and I have reason to believe there might have been something suspicious about his death. Meet me at Elmwood Park in an hour, Dr. Hayes said, his voice dropping to a low, grave tone. There's something you need to know. Dr. Hayes was sitting on a bench near the pond when I arrived, feeding breadcrumbs to the ducks. He was in his 80s now, with stooped shoulders and liver-spotted hands, but his eyes were sharp and alert. Thank you for meeting me, I said, sitting beside him. He didn't look at me, just kept tossing breadcrumbs. I've carried this guilt for 12 years. Maybe it's time to let it go. What guilt? Courthouse, and I wasn't sure she'd answer, but she did. On the fourth ring. Anna, she said quietly, her voice hesitant. Melissa, I need your help with something. I can't. Mom and Dad are furious about the court case. They've forbidden me to talk to you. Melissa, I think they killed Grandpa. Silence on the other end. Then, a shaky, disbelieving whisper. What? I told her everything. The trust fund, Henry's suspicions, Dr. Hayes' statement about the digoxin poisoning. I told her about my grandfather's plans to change his will, about my mother's suspicious visit to Henry's office, about the bribe to Dr. Hayes. That's impossible, Melissa said, but her voice wavered, losing its conviction. They wouldn't. They couldn't. They put a child's health at risk to save money on repairs, I said, my voice cutting. They threw me out onto the street when I was 19. They sued me for emotional distress when I dared to stand up to them. What makes you think they're above murder? But Grandpa, he was their father. He was also worth $2 million, and they were about to lose half of it. Melissa was quiet for a long time, the silence stretching, heavy with unspoken implications. Then she said, her voice small, What do you need from me? Mom keeps records, right? Financial documents, receipts, everything. Does she still have files from 12 years ago? Yes. She keeps everything in the storage room in the basement. The trust was to remain completely confidential until you met the conditions. He didn't want your parents to know about it. Didn't want them to interfere or try to claim it for themselves. He knew them too well. I thought about my grandfather, the quiet man who'd always had a kind word for me when my parents didn't. He'd been the only one who believed I could be something more than what my parents said I was. There's something else, Henry said, pulling out an envelope. an almost sacred gesture. Your grandfather wrote you a letter. He asked me to give it to you when the time came. My hands trembled as I opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper covered in my grandfather's careful, familiar handwriting. Dear Anna, if you're reading this, then you've done what I always knew you could do. You've made something of yourself, despite everything they've thrown at you. I'm proud of you. Even though I won't be there to tell you in person, I know your parents have made your life difficult. I've watched them favor your sister. Watched them tear you down whenever you tried to rise. It broke my heart, but I couldn't change them. All I could do was try to give you a foundation to build on. This money isn't a solution to all your problems, but it's a start. Use it wisely. Build the life you deserve. And remember, you are worth more than they will ever understand. There's one more thing I need you to know. I was planning to change my will completely, to leave you half of everything. Half the properties, half my savings. You deserved it more than they did. But I ran out of time. Be careful, Anna. Your parents are not good people. They care more about money than anything else, even family. Don't let them destroy you. You're stronger than they are. Love always, Grandpa. Tears streamed down my face as I read the letter, each word a balm and a wound. My grandfather had wanted to give me more. He'd been planning to change his will to make sure I was truly taken care of, but he died before he could do it. There's something you should know, Henry said gently, pulling me back from my thoughts. The week before your grandfather died, your mother came to see me. She was asking questions about his will, about whether he'd made any recent changes. I didn't tell her anything, of course, due to client privilege, but she was very persistent, very concerned about the estate. A chill ran down my spine, cold and sharp. You think she knew he was planning to change the will? I can't say for certain, Henry continued, choosing his words carefully. But the timing was suspicious. Your grandfather was in perfect health one week, and the next week he was dead. Heart failure, they said, but he just had a physical exam, and his doctor told him he had the heart of a man 20 years younger. What are you saying? I asked, my voice barely a whisper, dread coiling in my gut. Henry leaned back in his chair, his gaze steady. I'm saying that when someone stands to lose a significant inheritance, they might do things they wouldn't otherwise do. I'm saying that your grandfather's death was very convenient for your parents. And I'm saying that if you look closely at the circumstances, you might find some questions that were never properly answered. My mind was reeling. Was he suggesting what I thought he was suggesting? That my parents had something to do with my grandfather's death? I have no proof, Henry continued. Just an old lawyer's suspicions. But I thought you should know, especially now that you've gone up against them in court. They've shown you what they're capable of when their money is threatened. Imagine what they might do if the stakes were even higher. I left Henry's office in a daze, clutching the folder with the trust documents and my grandfather's letter. $60,000. It was enough to pay off the student loans I was still chipping away at. Enough to have a real emergency fund. Enough to finally breathe. But all I could think about was Henry's words. Your grandfather's death was very convenient for your parents. I drove straight to the public library and spent the next 3 hours digging through old newspaper archives. I found my grandfather's obituary, brief and respectful. Died peacefully at home, surrounded by family. But there was another article, smaller, from a week later. A letter to the editor from my grandfather's longtime physician, Dr. Russell Hayes, expressing shock at the sudden death of a patient he'd just examined and declared healthy. I found Dr. Hayes' contact information and called his office. He'd retired 5 years ago, but the receptionist gave me his home number. When I called, he answered on the third ring. Dr. Hayes, my name is Anna Thompson. I'm calling about my grandfather, James Thompson. You were his doctor,